I'm Gale, Brewer, Manhattan Borough President, and I'm honored to be here. I'm with Deputy Borough President Alvin Bonilla, who is in the back and has been here all day. And thank you, Jason, for this, and also Community Board number 10. Those are huge roles, and all the other ones that you play. I was in the City Council for 12 years. I actually was the first tenant in this building with Mary Ann Crooksack in 1974. So I've been around quite a few years. And also, we have a district office that's on the street at 431 West 125th Street. So we try to be as responsive as we can. I want to give you a couple of, I know the hour is late, but ways in which we have in the Borough President's office, thanks to Alvin and others, we've tried to address some of these issues. About a year and a half ago with Eric Adams, who's the Borough President of Brooklyn, and with Norman Siegel, who's a civil rights attorney, we brought together police and young people and community board members and just regular New Yorkers in different parts of Manhattan, but definitely Harlem, Washington Heights, Lower East Side, to talk about community police issues. It's on our website, and I can go through some of them. A lot of them came out in a report, and a lot of these issues are not dissimilar from what was discussed today. What does the patrol guide include? What should the CTRB look like? The investigator should be somebody who's not just the result of an executive order, as great a job as Eric is doing. Even things like, this was Eric Adams' idea, police officers who've had, because they have had traumatic experiences, should be able to have a sabbatical, just like a teacher should have a sabbatical. On the CCRB, there should be somebody, a member who's been the victim of some kind of police brutality, so that that person understands and can speak up as a board member. We had lots of discussions. There's like 37 different ways that the police department should operate differently, and the police themselves should get some benefits. So this report was a result of much discussion. Then just very recently, after the horrific killings and murders that we all know about, we had in East Harlem and in West Harlem, East and West in terms of the communities, hundreds of people showed up. We had 250 people, West and East, just recently. Anybody's welcome. These are all open. All of these forums are open. They're on our website. We try to do as much outreach as possible, just talking about racism in general. Without the police department, they actually didn't want to come. I think that they were not comfortable coming to such a discussion, to be honest with you. But we will have them to come back to this fall, and everybody's welcome, to have another discussion, a follow-up to our report. And I think that the police department is paying attention because they've been meeting with us. They want to meet with Jason Clark and, as you know, all the bar associations. They want to have these kind of discussions. To be honest with you, we don't have agreement on all of these suggestions. And so for us to go out and say that everything is great when we know it's not, we are not going to do that. But I just want to let you know, those are some of the things that we have been working on. Now, another example is how do you, with data, you heard a big discussion earlier about technology. I come out of the technology community. I was chair of the technology committee in the city council. I passed the open data bill, which states that all city agencies, NYPD included, have to put up on a portal all of their data. In the past, like in the early 2000s, every agency had their own little list of what their data is, and the public had no idea where to find it. So by actually 2018, it all has to be up. But a lot of the agencies have done it. What we want is to have the NYPD and CCRB and any other agency have predictor, so that you have this kind of data about a police officer who does some infractions and they build up. And you can almost predict with the data that we have in 2016 which officer is going to be the kind of officer who should not be on the police department force. So these are the kinds of specific recommendations that have come out. The other thing about data is that the 7 categories that you always hear about, grand larceny, murder, and so on, they're up on the open data. But what we want for the police department to know where there is an officer or a precinct is targeting certain individuals, which we know happens. We want to have the summons data and other kinds of data that's not one of the big 7 categories to be part of the open data portal. Data is an amazing indicator, and people who know how to read it can then state, this is what's going on in this precinct, in this census tract, in this community. So the whole issue of data is something that isn't sexy, it isn't talked about a lot, but it needs to be much more part of our discussion, in my opinion. I also want to just talk about residency for a minute, because the gentleman over here and my wonderful colleague, the assembly member, knows much more about this than I do. I would be very happy if we could have a residency for police officers in the city of New York, but my understanding is it has to go through Albany, and the state senate has never been supportive. As you know, you can live in Suffolk or Nassau or Rockland or Westchester or Orange County, and that's a big problem. I don't know even if the Democrats in the Senate would vote for that, because these are all their families and cousins and relatives and so on. So that whole issue of residency is something that I know the Assemblyman knows a lot more about than I do. So the only other thing I want to mention is we in the Borough President's Office, we obviously work on zoning, appointments to community boards and other boards, allocate funding. Now, the other thing that came out of the forums that we had in terms of police community relations is we allocated to quite a few youth groups funding to talk about these issues and to have youth groups figure out how they can address these issues. And now, thanks to the district attorney's office, and you may have heard this, they're giving out millions of dollars. There's deadlines for that for youth groups to figure out ways that that money can be used to have better police community relations, have better job programs, and so on, everything to prevent crime. And so I assume you're aware of that. I wasn't here earlier, but that I want to thank the district attorney's office. I don't know if other boroughs are doing it, but I want to thank the Advances office, because it's going to make a big difference. It's $250 million, which is quite a lot of money. People should know that and apply for it if it's applicable to what you're up to. Within the schools, we are also trying to push this, we call it data science, but it's basically this data issue of teaching young people how to use this data. Because not only will they learn the math and the science and so on, but we can use it to predict not just the issue, obviously what we're talking about today, police community relations, but all the other ways in which their lives can be improved, or using the data to show where they are not getting a fair share. And then, so I just mentioned that because we get piloted in a couple of schools this year to teach young people. LA is doing it in a big way, and it's made a huge difference. So those are some of the things that that we're working on. It's a long process. We've also been meeting with the precinct councils. I may be talking a little bit off the, out of turn. The police, I've been going to police community relations for so long, I can't even remember. They are not a place where much gets done. I want to give the commanding officer of every precinct credit because they go through the statistics. But the same people go to the police community relations who have been going for centuries. It's very interesting. And so we need to figure out a way. They're the most boring, god-awful meetings I've ever been to. And so, and I apologize if there are people here who go. But I say young people would never go to a police community relations. They would be bored to death. I teach at Hunter College in addition to being a borough president, and I send the young people to meetings, and they come back in shock. So we need to think, we're actually going to be meeting in Manhattan with all the precinct directors of the precinct councils in a positive way, because they work hard, it's part of their community service. But in order to have young people, we need to think differently about the police community councils. The whole police precinct, why can't we have an ATM machine? Why can't we have Wi-Fi that's free there? Why can't we have water fountains? Why can't it be a place that you go? It's there 24/7. I mean, many people go, last thing you want to do is walk into I don't want to go there because I don't want to go to the precinct council meeting. But other people don't go there for the obvious reason that it's a hostile environment. So we need to make it a safe environment. Not overnight, it's not going to happen. But what can we put into that precinct that would make people want to go there, that would make it welcoming? It's a very challenging place to go. At least I find it challenging, and God knows young people find it challenging. So these are some of the recommendations that are, that doesn't, of course, deal with the suggestions. We have lots of suggestions on community policing and training and ways in which all on the Borough President's website, on Eric Adams' website. But it's more, many of the ideas that have come out today. So I really appreciate being here. We'll be glad to answer questions later, but now we can listen to the wonderful assembly member. Right.
Good to meet you.
Thank you, Madam Borough President. Good afternoon, everyone. I know we're not going anywhere because it's starting to rain outside. But it's good to be here. I want to thank Jason, and I want to thank the community board and all, NAACP, and the folks that have brought this very, very important forum together. For those of you that do not know me, I actually, criminal justice reform and police misconduct reform is probably in my DNA, some might say. My father was probably fighting these same issues, at least 40 to 50 years ago, when he was a judge in the criminal court and a judge in the Supreme Court, and he actually wrote about it in a couple of books that he wrote. One book called Black Robes, White Justice, the other Black Justice in the White World. Now, I have a brother that's an acting Supreme Court judge, and I graduated from law school in 1982. And I decided the best way for me to be effective was to probably go into elective office. I have been serving this community in the New York State legislature for the past 24 years. And I would hope, and I heard the gentleman before us talking about folks that have celebrity crushes on elected officials. I can honestly say I don't think anyone has ever had a celebrity crush on me. If there was, it was unrequited and I didn't know about it. So let me just tell you some of the things, because, and I've been listening to the panels, the last three panels, I guess, and a lot of the discussion had to do with people like the borough president and myself. We're talking about legislation, talking about what public officials can do, what laws can be passed in order to stop the madness, to just plain stop the madness. Now, there are certain things on the city level that can be done, and that's what the borough president has outlined in a comprehensive way, but certainly on the state level, for example, back in 1999, after the death of Amadou Diallo, I put together, as chair of the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus, put together a comprehensive package of legislation, not the least of which was in order to get a special prosecutor to prosecute cases of police misconduct. Now, simply, the theory being is that district attorneys and police officers have an incestuous relationship.
Yes.
And they have to rely upon each other each and every day for their work and basically for their livings. So I wanted to take away that incestuous relationship in order to create a more fair and a more impartial relationship in terms of prosecuting cases of police misconduct. Now, I happen to think that police officers are no more or no less citizens than you and me. That's always been my philosophy. If they break the law, they need to be prosecuted as well. Now, that piece of legislation that I crafted 16 years ago, each and every year it would pass in the New York State Assembly. Okay, good. If I can't propose a law and pass it in the New York State Assembly, I'm not worth the money that you taxpayers pay me. Although it could be more. But anyway. But it would never be able to pass the New York State Senate for 15 years. That's why I was so grateful that the governor of the state of New York last year, the year before last, put forth that piece of legislation as an executive order. And when you had the mothers of the victims of police misconduct on the stage, I actually cried that day because it was worth seeing all of the hard work coming to fruition. Now, we have a lot of other things to do. The problem with an executive order is that it has to be renewed each and every year. Now, if this governor's not there, it's not going to be renewed. So we have to create some outside pressures. One of the other pieces of legislation that I put forward is that police officers need to be tested for drugs and alcohol every time they fire their guns.
Talk about it.
All right, very important. Whenever you have an accident on a subway or a train or a bus, those drivers are immediately tested for drugs and alcohol.
Yeah.
And if you have a plane, accident in a plane, those airplane pilots are immediately tested for drugs and alcohol. police officers should be held to the same strict liability standard and be tested for drugs and alcohol. Now that bill has passed in the New York State Assembly, but it has not passed in the New York State Senate. And the borough president is right. A lot of those folks in the New York State Senate they reside in our suburban counties, upstate counties, and they come to work here in the city of New York. So, a lot of those elected officials that represent them in those bedroom communities up there would not want to anger them, if you will. The other piece of common sense legislation that I'm the author of the bill to ban racial profiling. Now that's simple. That's just a collection of data. It passes the New York State Assembly, but it doesn't pass the New York State Senate. Now what we tend to do, and what I'm saying is that our elected officials in our communities are doing what they're supposed to do. It's the elected officials in the other communities that we need to take our activism to. Take it to their doorsteps. Because let me just tell you, some of their kids are being subjected to the same type of things that we have been subjected to. Look at the drug problem. I used to think it was just in black and Latino areas. I remember growing up in Marcus Garvey Park, we used to call it Needle Park. Right? You used to see the drug addicts with the needles coming out of their arms. Now that it's hit the white community, now it's a problem. It's a problem. Right? We have the heroin packages and the drug packages for Long Island, but we've been enduring this for years. So police misconduct is just not relegated. I mean, it is, but to a large extent, but it's not relegated to our community. So we put forth some legislative fixes. Legislation doesn't always fix the hearts and the minds. It's pieces of legislation. I remember when we weren't allowed to drink from the same water fountains as white folks. I remember that. But for legislation has become a way of being. So, we've been doing what we're supposed to do. But I was listening and I was intrigued by the woman that talked about the insurance coverage. And I thought that was, because that's how legislation is made, by listening to folks. That's how legislation is made. It becomes a concept, and you put a concept into a piece of legislation, and you get your colleagues to vote on it. Now, on the city level of government, the borough president, I think, probably is more acquainted with the Know Your Rights legislation. What do you call it? Know Your Rights legislation. Yeah, Know Your Rights legislation, where a police officer should be mandated to tell you, number one, who he is or who she is, and number two, to tell you why he or she is searching you. That should be standard operating procedure. Or if you can consent to the search or not consent to the search. A lot of people don't know that. So with that, I just want to say this panel, I think, is very, very important. And I'm glad to have the borough president here. And with that, I'll wrap it up, I guess. Take questions. Thanks, yes.
Sure. Well, there was an interesting thing that you had just mentioned, and I think it makes a lot of sense because we keep going out there, and it's certainly a theme tonight has been, these are all the policies, these are the things that need to be done, and we need to get our elected officials to be able to be behind them. But if a lot of the elected officials in our neighborhoods are advocating for those things, what can be done at that next step? So I guess the question that I have is that, especially with people having more cameras, people, there's a lot of individuals who seem to have a lot more awareness of these issues, and it was not the case, 3 or 4 years ago. So given the kind of the change of climate, do you think there's more of a possibility that some of these things like making sure officers are tested for drugs or alcohol after they fire their weapon, or some of these other things that seem like quality bills, can actually pass and then become laws?
I think that we have to get groups like the Bar Association and others behind us. I can give an example, it's not exactly specific, but I passed with Jamani Williams the Fair Chance Act, which basically says if you have a record, in the past you had to check off a box. Now that box is gone. And what was interesting is the administration has done outreach and even the online applications, because that wasn't thought of, also, you don't have to check the box. How do we pass it? Because that's pretty controversial. Chamber of Commerce's were not happy, etc. But we got all the groups that are working on criminal justice, tons of them, to be behind it. And that is now the law in the city of New York. So one of the issues, I think, for legislation to pass, and there's a lot of discussion about cameras and how they get used by police officers, what happens to that footage, how does it get used, when is it on, when is it off, and then, of course, making sure that people have the right to take pictures. All of that, I think you have to work in a coalition in groups like this. My feeling generally is we come up with what we want, and then we present it, we meaning the community, and then we present it. Working with the Civil Liberties Unit, because of course they're going to have input into some of this. Working with the technologists, because one of the issues is what do you do with archives, how do you handle that, all of those technology issues that you wouldn't think of as you're filming. What do you do with all the archivist material that, if it is or is not, and how long is it going to be held? Even all the security cameras that are in every block of the city. Where does that material go? Who's watching it? What's the follow-up? Is or not archived, etc. All of these issues are not something that are as on the forefront of people, but for those of us who are involved with the tiny bits of legislation and how it passes, we have to think about these things. So I do think that these are issues that, in terms of cameras, could in fact be much more discussed because people are using them. But then you have to think of what else can be done. Something better, is that the best kind of camera that cops have? Is it the best kind of, what is the best kind of, what are the legal issues that come about when we take the film, etc.
Well, and I think Gale is right. And let me just say this, let me just add quickly. What I really think needs to be done is, because I've been in the legislature 24 years, and I don't really think I've had, as of yet, especially with the Metropolitan Black Bar Association, which is an offshoot of the Harlem Lawyers Association, way back when, is that I don't think I've really had a legislative discussion with the Metropolitan Black Bar. I'm saying we need to communicate in a better fashion. Black Bar Association needs to maybe talk to elected officials. I know the gentleman was talking about a meeting that we had, that he had with black lawyers last week in Schaumburg. It was a very important meeting because I set up the meeting and brought all of the black lawyers together, along with a guy named Tony Rico, who's a fantastic criminal lawyer. But I think there needs to be more discussion among us internally. Internally. So that's really all I have to say.
I was going to say all the bar associations, Hispanic, LGBT, and so on, everybody could be working together to really push some of these issues. That would help. I think PD would pay a lot of attention if this issue was brought by all the communities of color representing bar associations.
Well, actually, that's first. I could pretty much say on behalf of the MBBA, I think we'd certainly be willing and love to have this conversation and have this not just be the end of the day, but really the beginning, right? And good afternoon. I guess I'd like to take a moment to recognize City Council member Ines Dickens. And yeah, I mean, there's going to be a lot more that we're going to be doing. I think this is a good start, and trying to put together some of that legislation. I guess given that Mrs. Dickens here, maybe we'd pass it on to her, and if she'd like to say something.
I don't need a mic. Does everyone hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
I thought so. I'm grateful to CV10 and of course to the Metropolitan Black Bar for putting this together. And Jason, thank you for what you're doing, and I appreciate it. We all do as an elected. We have to all work together. So you already know. That's why you're here in the ring Saturday when you could be doing something else. Now, there's a lot of things that the electeds have done. We've got a terrible situation going on in this country. We know that. Racism didn't die, ever. It's just manifesting itself once again in the same manner that was always done. It's just now it's being publicized nationally or internationally, whereas before it wasn't done that way. And we have to stand together, united politically, and the best way to do it is through politics. And I say that because it starts at the top. When we elect a mayor or a governor or whatever at the top of the ticket, it's who they hire under them that implements policy. Now, it's already against the law to do all these things that's being done. That's why the relevancy, and I want to thank Jeff Eaton and the NAACP for continuing this fight that caused them to manifest in 100 years ago, and the relevancy is still there. And we have to elect those at the top that will put in place the policy makers that do what we need. Now, we've got some phenomenal electeds. Gale Brewer was my colleague in the city council, but prior to that, she was a community activist before she ever got elected. She was a community activist that worked hard. Keith Wright, we all know Keith. And Keith has been in the assembly for 24 years. But before that, he still worked in the community. Now, we talk about the violence and what are the electeds going to do. The electeds have implemented laws. But we have a responsibility to our families and our community. That means we're supposed to know what our children are bringing into our homes. That's my responsibility, to see that what my child has got on their back, I didn't pay for, who paid for it? That's my responsibility. As my father used to tell me, you know your child. Now, you defend your child, because that's your child. But you also, if you want to save your child, there's certain steps we have to take. In the city council, God blessed me with three phenomenal things that come out of the city council. Funding of local organizations, and I took that seriously to fund those organizations that were doing the work. Land use, which land use has the tentacles for the creation of jobs and for implementing housing, affordable and unfortunately unaffordable. And God blessed me, and I'm grateful to you for vesting in me the power to do what was needed. See, we all have the eye on the prize. We may not be on the same path all the time, but it's the prize that's the important thing. And our kids, that's our prize, that's our future, that's our lives. That's the only thing we've got, are our youth. But it means we've got a responsibility to teach them, to educate them, to love them, to protect them, to, yes, chastise them when we see they're going in the wrong direction. And a lot of times we're afraid of our own kids. And that should not be, because it's not new in the Black and Latino communities that we're being raised by grandmothers. That's nothing new. We act like this is brand new. That's always been intergenerational in our communities. Always has been. But now we're afraid of our own kids. We're afraid to tell them, don't emulate and have your pants down. Pull them up like you're a man. Walk strong and tall. And the women, the young girls we've got to show them, because truthfully, guys, I love y'all, but the women rock the world. You know, we do the work. Sorry, Keith.
I'm good.
But it's the truth. And you want to know some of the things that I've done? Hey, I have from day one funded organizations such as Aisha Sekou, Street Corner Resources, that goes into the street and occupy a corner. I stand out with Gale and Keith and Congressman Charles Ringer to occupy a street corner. I have funded Harlem Mother Save, that unfortunately was formed because they were parents that were heartbroken over the loss of their children. I fund the hip hop organization because we have a once a year, it's not enough, a meeting that we come together, and I meet with the gang kids. I walk into the streets and into the NYCHA developments because every year I fund NYCHA Family Days to try to show my kids that there's another way, that families have to be united together as one. I have walked into my NYCHAs because that's where my families are. That's where my village resides. And I'll be damned if I'm going to be scared of it. Because that's mine, that's me. That's where I was born and raised. I've supported Wadley High School and fund annually for the kids that are cutters to be able to publish their poetry. You all know what cutters are? All right, that are cutters, in order to try to publish them. And in fact, I entered them and they won a national grant for Wadley. I built a music, with the help of Gale and Keith, we built a music sound studio because the kids tell me they like hip hop and I want them in school. Then you know what? I did a ribbon cutting along with Gale and Keith last year to open a sound studio for my kids to be able to go into the school. And then of course I tell them I'm locking the doors because they can't come back out. Because that's what I'm supposed to do. Amen. That's what you asked me to do. And that's the only future I got. That's the only future all of us have. So it's not nearly enough. I'm not going to ever tell you it's sufficient, but it's what I can do and when I can do it. And God knows, my first 8 years in the council, I rocked this community with more than $100 million a year. Had never been done before in the history of the city council. I was the first black woman to be in leadership in the city council. Because they knocked me off my pedestal. But because of what I had done, I'm still able. And because I've got Gale Brewer that will help me to put build a brand new library and Apple Computer Center at PS 197 on 135th Street and 5th Avenue. I'm talking about, I can tell you dates, times, and places. Not just say I did and let you find out. I can give you the locations.
I used to work in this.
So that you know, you can look it up. You know where the money went. Because it's your tax dollars. It ain't my money, it's your tax dollars. And that's why every family day in NYCHA in my district got funded for Family Day. God bless you. Thank you.
All right.
So I have about 46 questions, and I imagine I could probably try to find you guys later on to go through some of those, but it'd probably make the most sense to make sure that some of the people here, who I'm sure have questions of their own, have an opportunity to speak. So I guess maybe we'll start with individual in the front.
Nice to see you. My question is, I'm going to give Yashan Small shot in a police car. 2016. I spoke to the wife. I spoke to the wife myself. I grew up with many of you. A lot of you, I wouldn't be here without, it wasn't for y'all. Before, back in the day, we used to march, lock hand in hand, politicians and community. Yet, what's happening in our community? We don't do that no more. When are we going to bring that back? To send a message that we're not going to tolerate what's happening in our community. Because what I've been seeing, and I grew up with y'all sitting here, I learned a lot from both of you. What are we going to do as a community, politicians and community, to change what's happening now? Because it is very upsetting.
Well, listen, let me just say this. I'm a prime advocate of marching and advocating. Frederick Douglass said a long time ago, agitate, agitate, agitate. Now, that being said, I'm a child of the 60s, and you're saying you're as old as I am, but you look a lot younger. But I remember that we back in the 60s and 70s, we changed, we stopped wars, the war in Vietnam, we got Peace and Voting Rights Act, Civil Rights Act, and it was a real time of activism. What I see now, and I hadn't seen it in a while, is that the Black Lives Matter group is starting to agitate more, and they seem to be pretty effective. So I think that we really need to cultivate these younger folks, because I know, it's been a while since I've been on a picket line. I'm sure it's been a while since you've been on one too. But, we can provide advice and counsel, but a lot of the activism needs to come from our younger folks. I think we as adults have probably not done as good a job as we probably should have been doing in terms of passing down our history of activism to some of our kids. But I think that these new folks are kind of bringing it back up, and quite frankly, I'm glad to see it.
I think that the Bernie folks, I happen to be a Hillary supporter, but the Bernie folks really pushed the agenda to their credit, and it was, they've now returned to communities around the cities in the United States or areas with, people from Occupy, Black Lives Matter. There are a lot of community organizations concerned about affordable housing. So there's a lot of folks out there. I do think we need to have something specific that we're fighting for. If it's something in Albany or something about cameras or something about training, I know those sound like, that's helpful. If there's something, that we could say, we are going to be in the streets for X, as opposed to, in the old days, we could just be in the streets because we wanted to fight the whole system. But I do think it helps, the Bernie people had a candidate. People, Black Lives Matter, have specific issues often. So that would be the only caveat I think that would be different. I too am a product of the 60s.
It's a little different today. The 60s and 70s, we didn't have as much social media. And social media has caused us, and this is not negative about social media. I'm just saying that social media has caused us to be a society of couch potatoes. With this, me included, I'm not taking myself out of it, I'm at fault. And we don't go to meetings like we used to in the 60s and 70s. You had to go someplace to get the message, to see if an organization was really about what your agenda was. Now we get it off of social media, which may or may not be factual. So social media has played a great part in lifting up a generation. It has also done a lot to deteriorate the connection that is necessary to formulate groups that will march.
That's right.
And so, do I have the answer? No, I don't. But I mean, this room ought to be full.
Yeah.
Ought to be full. But instead, those that are texting and the few people that'll look at it, they'll get it off of that, and they may get some and get some they won't get. So I'm not placing blame. I'm just saying we have to look at the good and the bad of each and everything, and extrapolate those things that are good and push back on those that are not. We as a society are touchy-feely people. And you don't get that with social media. So you ask, what do we do? I don't know. Because it's not an idea. In the 60s and 70s, it could be an idea. It could be a murder. It could be a lynching. It could have been a lot of things that pulled us together to decide that we've got to march or we've got to do this or that. Today, we don't have that same connection.
Let's see, I guess, so I'm gonna give probably 2 to 3 more questions. So, let's see, I guess, go to the left.
Thank you guys for being here, talking, everybody that showed up, definitely. I do volunteer work with WEAC, so I know it's definitely right, and Gale, you guys are huge supporters of that. One of the things that have come up as we've been working with stuff, or just having to volunteer to go up to Albany and rally against some of their policy is, we don't know the process from beginning to end. And I like how you guys brought that up. I'm hoping that we can do more teaching, something I suggested to WEAC. How do we, or like you said, yeah, passed here, and we're like, yeah, wow. No, we gotta continue to do this part and that part. We don't know the process know exactly where we're gonna place the pressure. Is that something that you guys?
You know, you really, you hit that button, that point. The thing is that, for instance, we, in our communities, all the communities across the city of New York, we've got political clubs. We need to be involved in a club. Don't have to be mine or Keith's or Gale's. I don't care which club it is. And I tell people, go to any club, I don't care what, and get active in that club in your community. It doesn't mean that you want to run for election, but it means you're going to have a voice in what is going to happen in your community. And the basis, the very basic of the political clubs. You go in there, the electeds go into the club, and then you got district leaders who serve without pay. They are the volunteers that gotta get elected, but they are the connection, the liaison between the electeds and the public. They're the ones that are there every day. Get involved, go to a club, put your agenda, and then the club can begin to carry the agenda, can begin to petition. And then 3 or 4 clubs can get together and carry buses, say, to Albany, or downtown to City Hall, or to Washington, D.C. We got 3 levels of government, and we need to hit all 3. I'm sorry I sound passionate, but I am passionate about this.
I just want to add to community
I don't
boards, which you
apologize.
probably know, but I think if, community boards, I'm a big supporter of. And the issue would be if all the community boards, if we had an agenda on police-community relations that was X, Y, and Z, on education, and this is what we want out of Albany or the city council, then I think resolutions coming out of them constantly, 59 of them, 48 of them, all 12 in Manhattan, that's also helpful.
Very quickly, what do you want to do? Listen, activism is supposed to elicit or bring about social change. That's what activism is supposed to do. And you can choose any topic, but your ultimate aim is achieving social change, and it's not necessarily glamorous, it's not necessarily sexy, it's just about doing the grunt work and starting out in meetings like this on a Saturday afternoon, or as Borough President and council members say, whether it's at a precinct council or a community board council. I mean, I know these folks are from all around the city, but and these are people that, we know the people that go to these meetings. I mean, we see them all the time. And so now we just, and I'm sure the borough president and council member more than enthusiastic about seeing newer people trying to get involved.
And I guess given the time, we're probably gonna have to go with one more question, but I'd like to give the lady to the right, I believe that's Bree. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Bree.
Stand up so we can hear you. You have a soft, beautiful voice.
Hi, my name is Bree. It's an honor to be here. I'm actually from the Bronx, from the part of the area community. And this morning when I walked in, I was asked by Jason and told and informed that a big part of what today was going to be about was discussing how we can better build relationships between minorities and people in the urban city with police officers. So I tried to pay attention all day. I listened to all of the suggestions, to the forums, the panels, and now that I see how passionate, Borough President Brewer is and Council Member Dickens is, I'm sitting here thinking to myself of all these.
You too, Assembly Kid. Assembly Kid.
I had to go with the girls. I had to go. So, sitting here thinking about it, I put together this map of everyone's suggestions, and I heard a lot of things today, like police should be more involved with the local PALs, they should be able to walk the beat more. I also heard suggestions in regards to fixing legislation, to signing petitions, to having new rules in regards to evidence. And now that it's the end of the day, I'm sitting here thinking, I would like to ask you guys, ask your opinion about the suggestion and how New York City would feel in regards to having maybe smaller, more subsequent precincts in our neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. Personally, I'm from the Bronx, and we have, all kinds of neighborhoods over there. We have Bedford Park, we have Riverdale, we have Soundview. So it would be so cool, to be able to walk into different neighborhoods throughout the city and in central Harlem and perhaps see a smaller precinct where people can walk in and not feel like they're in a situation or they're in a predicament where they're in danger, where they can actually go and talk to these local officers. Perhaps in these smaller precincts, people can actually file complaints and cases and drop off evidence pertaining to whatever's going on outside in that neighborhood. So that was just a suggestion I made, and I would just like to hear what everyone's opinion is on it.
I mean, I think you're certainly onto something in terms of the outreach and the way in which PD operates, the blue. And it is a very, even as an elected official, as a white woman, when I go into the precinct, I really want somebody to say hello. And that's a challenge. Not every precinct, but I go in a lot, and of course I'm looking for the hello, because that's how I am. And so I do think, when I spoke earlier, I was just trying not to talk too much because it's late. But the whole precinct world has to be changed. From the precinct council, I just didn't hear me talk not too favorably about the precinct council, but I did. And the way the desk is situated and the high desk, and you feel like a peon down below, all of that has to be changed. Some of them even still have plexiglass. So I would suggest that the whole world, when you walk into a fire station, I know that's a different situation, their fire department, to their credit, I think because of a lawsuit, but to their credit, they now have open house all the time. I've never been to a police precinct open house. I have been to the fire station open house. Now, it's a different role, I understand that, but that's what we need. Now, could we have more precincts? Probably not budget-wise, would be my guess, but I do think that you're onto something. We can talk endlessly about the training, the community, neighborhood affairs, whatever it's called. They get certain kind of training. Everybody should get that kind of training. So the hello at the precinct, not to mention the individual, is missing. Not all the time, but it's hard to. It's again, like everything else, hard to change. I don't know if you can legislate that, like you can about the training and so on. But we've had many conversations with Commissioner Bratton, and what he's telling us, I don't know if this is correct, is that the old guard is going to be almost impossible to change. There are good ones and bad ones, but it's going to be, but the 3,000 that he's training, he feels that there's some hope. He's doing it differently. We have, again, many suggestions. We think they should have a whole year of training. They have 6 months. Yeah. He maintains they have 6 months at the academy, and then there's more training that's going on in the precincts, which is different than how it was done under Ray Kelly. It's all in the report that we wrote. But there's a lot of non-legislative changes that we have to push. But you're absolutely right about the environment.
Well, yeah, I think you're absolutely right about the environment. I mean, the culture of police and the culture of police departments is crazy. I mean, it's almost like they're anti. Yeah, and everybody else. And to a certain extent, the policies that they put with broken windows and such need to be totally corrected from head to toe. But what, in terms of your question, Bree, your question was, do the police precincts need to be smaller? I don't think so. You got to remember that there's catchment areas. So, but I think what you're actually saying is that the police departments probably need to be more customer friendly. That's what it sounds like you're trying to say, and that's something that we've all been trying. I mean, Gale says that he's just trying to get a hello. When I go up to the 32nd precinct, I got a guy standing at the door that won't let me in when I'm trying to get somebody out of jail, or to stop somebody from being booked to going through central booking. That's going to screw up their whole lives for the next 20 to 30 years that they went through the system. So, but I think and this is what, this is perennial, this is what Councilmember Dickens, this is what we all try and do. And certainly we need your help on the activism side.
Well, I'm going to be a little different, and I know that this is coming to the end. And this is not to be anti-anybody, because there's like anything else, there's good and bad in everything, and in every walk of life. But things start at the top. I'm a child of the 60s. Civil rights movement the South didn't like the change of vote when Lyndon Johnson signed the Bill of Rights for voting. But it made them comply, the states comply. They didn't like it, but they were forced to comply. It starts at the top. Now, I'm gonna be honest, and this is not bashing of the police, because there's great police. But this is also a police commissioner that wrote the book on stop and frisk. So, come on, guys, what are you looking for? See, what are you looking for? You know, we've got to understand where this all starts and comes from. And I guess I'm getting myself in a world of trouble. But the truth of the matter is we got to look at who we put in place. I can't say it often enough. You know, and that's whether we're talking about district leader or city council or assembly or senate or Congress. I don't care what we're talking, or mayor. Because it's who you put in place that represents you.
Amen.
So if you put in a commissioner that wrote the book nationally
Don't vote for somebody just because of a commercial.
on stop and or a hairstyle, then we got to look at this. We got to look at not only what they say, but we've got to really listen to. I mean, this, you know, when someone says I'm going to put the police commissioner Bratton in, then you'll know who wrote Stop and Frisk. And he went around the city. He went to Chicago. He went to all the big cities and implemented this. Come on, guys. Look at this. If you really are real about activism, then do it.
Be about it.
Then do it. Don't talk it. Don't stand up here and complain to the electeds and say what you not doing. Get up off your butts and do something yourself. And you got the power. You don't need nobody to tell you term limits, damn it. You got the right. You pull that damn lever. You pull that lever. If they ain't doing your job, don't vote for them.
That said, I would like to thank all our local officials for coming out here and joining us today. And